Hi, what's good YouTube? In this video, I'm going to be going over every industry producer's biggest secret in their production. Quick video this time, let's get straight into it. But before the video starts, if you want any of the sounds or samples that I use in this tutorial, there's a link in the description where you can download them completely free. Instagram and Twitter at FinnaFinesse. Alright, let's get into it. Pierre Bourne. Apart from having like a bunch of secret VSTs that he uses, such as like Tyrell N6, Absinthe, FabFilter Twin 2, Sequel, FM8, Zebra 2, and many other plugins, the biggest thing I learned from him like making his beats is that one thing he does is when he makes his reverse melodies, he'll like play the original version of that melody in MIDI and then reverse the MIDI file and then record that and then reverse the recorded version of the reverse MIDI. So basically when you do that, what it allows you to do is just make it so you can play the original melody in reverse, and then when you reverse it, it's just going to give you that same effect, but it's going to be playing the original melody you had laid out in the first place. The way you do that in FL is you just hold Alt A and then hit Alt Y on your keyboard and then select flip horizontally, hit accept, then link it to the mixer track, go into Edison, record the audio, then take it, put it in your playlist, and then hit reverse. And now it will be playing the original notes we had laid out, except give it that same reverse effect. And yeah, if you're really trying to get creative like that, that's like a cool thing you can do. tminus. Hearing this from a guy like tminus is kind of crazy since he's such a, like an older producer. When he makes his melodies like in the piano roll, it's not like he knows like all the scales that he's using. A really cool thing he does is he goes into the FL Studio wrapper and he goes down here in function and he just like selects the root note down here. So now when you go into the sampler, you can simply just, whether it's on your keys or it's in FL Studio, you can just play all the white keys as if you're playing C major or A minor, whatever you want to call it, without having to learn like any music theory. It's also super helpful if you're like working with artists and they just like want to lay things down. You can just do that so they don't have to know any scales. But yeah, that's a super crazy trick that I wish I was doing when I started producing. TM88. So the coolest thing I learned about TM is like with like certain sounds as well as like samples, a cool trick you can do is in Effectrix, you can go to the loop and you can stretch it to whatever, just make sure it's like on beat. You can do something like this, or even something like this, and then just come down here with the knobs and mess with the things like the speed and the size. And what that's going to do is it's going to give this sample like skipping effect where you can like slow down the beat, almost kind of like a gross beat, but it's also going to make like certain samples and things like on time. And it's really just giving you this unique effect that you can't really get with other VSTs. For example, I got this sample loaded up here. I'll play it without the Effectrix. And here's with the Effectrix. And yeah, that's something I learned from TM that no other producer is really doing. Okay, next producer, 808 Melo. 808 Melo is probably the most known like drill producer. He made like all the hit songs to Pop Smoke, and they all kind of like followed the same formula where he literally just took samples from YouTube, went into Slice X, he went over to this regions tool right here, and then he went to auto slice and he chose medium grid slicing, and then he just like played like a 4-note pattern like this from like practically every single sample that he used. He may have reversed it in the Slice X like he kind of did with the Dior sample, but in general he just follows like these 4-note steps like this for like all his samples, and it works pretty well in practice. For example, I literally just made this drill beat now for the sake of this tutorial, just to put emphasis on the fact that this literally works with everything. I just stole this sample called like Cloud Larzan, like something Bridge River McGee, and I did just that with the beat slicing and made this little drill beat here. And yeah, with the right drill drums, that formula literally works every single time for samples. Wheezy. So as for Wheezy, like one thing he's very known for is his drums and having very unique sound. And like the one thing I learned from him after like watching a video of some guy loading up his computer is that he literally only uses like the shows the screen Lunch 77 drum kits from Reddit. I'm not going to link all of these in the description for you guys, but you guys can like find them there on Reddit. You know, they're super good drum kits. I mean, if they're good enough for Wheezy, they're good enough for anyone, right? Which, speaking of, the next producer I want to talk about is Mike Will. I couldn't find the original version of it on Reddit, at least a free version, but like he's been using this like Ducko like drum kit for like a while now. I found the original sound just through the Lunch 77 kit because I couldn't find the original one, so I'm gonna have that link for you guys in the description. But yeah, it's a really good drum kit. He uses a lot in his beats. Mira. There isn't too much of a secret to like what Mira does because, you know, he's always streaming when he's making beats, but one thing I always took away from like watching him make beats is that he uses like the same like general reference levels for his clap. What he does, he just uses this official trap clap. It's really just the Lex Luger clap, and he just turns it all the way up in the pattern block and then turns the velocity all the way up in here. And I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's just like, it's such a good practice when you use the same general reference level for something like a clap, because it's going to make your beats consistent, because you're always going to have that general level that you make your beats around. Murda Beatz. So this is something Murda does a lot with his drums to give them like way more bounce. What he does is he goes into the function tool here in the Fruity Wrapper, and he goes into the time down here, and he just like offsets the hi-hats to like about like right here. He does anything in between this and this, and what that's going to do is just going to create like an additional natural groove by offsetting the hi-hats, because hi-hats or drums in general aren't going to be like insanely quantized when actually played by hand. So it kind of gives it that realism, almost like the equivalent of like how you see producers randomizing the velocity of all their melodies to make them sound more real. Cashmoneyap, going back on what I was talking about with the Murda hi-hats, is that one thing I saw from him making beats is that he tends to just by like holding Alt, for example, just naturally, or by having them strummed by hitting Alt S, he just has like his chords basically plucked so they don't all hit at the same time. And now what that's going to do is it's going to give it like a feel of kind of like realism as if it's being played live, but it sounds way better if I were to not quantize it like this than if I were to quantize it like crazy. Example. OZ. So one thing I learned from OZ, and this is gonna be very quick, but he likes to make his drum patterns before his melodies, which is not something you see like all that often. That kind of makes you think that like if you have like a good drum pattern that's like bouncing, if you can really put like any loop on it and it's gonna sound good and it's gonna work. So, you know, don't be afraid to try making the drum pattern before the melody. Boomin. So Boomin's biggest production secret is that he makes a lot of his melodies with the gross beat halftime preset preloaded on his mixing rack. The reason he does this is just in general, like gross beat has always had that effect where it just kind of like slows everything down, softens your sounds, and just makes everything sound a little bit cooler. You can hear effects of him doing this a lot in some of his beats. For example, if you hear in like Low Life, that's a prime example of a beat that in the very end it plays the exact melody without the gross beat on it, but the entire time the real melody is playing with gross beat on it. He also apparently uses like a lot of like gross beat on his drums as well, but I do know for a fact that he uses the gross beat halftime preset on almost all of his melodies. I know some of you may be saying, oh, that's not like a secret, everyone does that, everyone knows about gross beat, but the thing about Boomin is that he makes the melodies beforehand with gross beat already preloaded on his mixing rack, and what that does is it kind of just like softens up the sound and gives you like this really unique like feel that you can't really get when you make the melodies beforehand and then put the gross beat on after. I'll give you guys a quick example of this. I have this old beat here that I made in like an old Trippy Red tutorial a couple months back. So with the gross beat, the melody sounds like this. But without the gross beat, it sounds like this. Like that's just something I would have never made originally had I not had the gross beat originally loaded on the master. So yeah, that's Metro's secret. Take a Daytrip. So the thing about Daytrip is like one thing I learned is that on their master, they put this L2 ultra maximizer on like practically every single one of their beats. It's really just a way to make things like significantly louder. It's like, it's a really good limiter and I strongly recommend trying it out. ATL Jacob, one of my favorite like trap producers, one of his go-to drum kits, and like almost every single trap producer uses this drum kit. I swear to God, it's like the most common kit like out there, but seriously, in my opinion, it's the best drum kit ever. It's the DY 808 Mafia drum kit. Producers use this kit like crazy. It's really the best trap drum kit. On top of the fact, if you want to know like how he masters his beats, like all he really does is he just messes with these three knobs down here, kind of like what I said in the Pyrex tutorial. He just kind of like does this basically and just gets a sound that he likes. If you're a starting out producer, just use like the DY drum kit and then just do this on the master of your beats. Like everything's gonna sound like amazing. And yeah, that's something I strongly recommend. Southside's secret isn't anything too crazy, but one thing he is very famous for is his drums. And the thing about his drums, specifically his hi-hats, is that he makes everything on the 1/3 step in FL Studio. Basically everything he does is to like a sixth roll. What he does with his hi-hats is, I'll show you guys from scratch what I would do. So I have this old beat loaded up, and let's say I just have my 2-step going like this. He just goes to piano roll, and instead of just like clicking them in manually, he just goes to 1/3 and he takes the paintbrush tool and he literally just like paints and like selects and then just like draws and just does this as he goes. So yeah, that one's not that crazy, but some people don't know that. Pyrex. So Pyrex is another producer who's also very known for his drums. One thing that Pyrex does that's very unique is that he uses this default preset. This is just called the compressor preset in FL Studio from Fruity Fastest. He does this a lot and he puts this like almost always on his drum sounds because it just gives them like additional like oomph to them basically. So for this beat in particular, I put it on the 808s and the hi-hats, and just so you guys can have a sense of what it sounds like, here's what it's like without the distortion. And here's what it sounds like with the distortion. Alright, that's gonna be it for this tutorial. Make sure to follow my Instagram and Twitter at FinnaFinesse, as well as go to the link in the description if you want to check out any of my drum kits or sound kits at my BeatStars page. Videos coming in the near future. Make sure to subscribe, and I'm out. Peace.